Welcome, everybody. What happened to me yesterday was quite unexpected. So, like I do often in the afternoon, I spend the last hour and a half, 2 hours, sometimes a little more, hopefully, and I go out fishing out here on this lake. What happened yesterday was quite unexpected. So, I go to a spot where traditionally there's a lot of smallmouth this time of year, and there has been for weeks now, for probably a month. Smallmouths, maybe even longer than that, 5 weeks. Smallmouths have been on this spot in excellent numbers, and it's a big area. You find a little cluster here, you find a little group of them here. So they're using this underwater structure pretty extensively, and they were last year at this time too. So I go out there and I get my blade bait out, drop the active target down, start scanning around, firing the blade bait out there, watching it and watching it. And I'm peeling up onto the good part of the structure, and I'm not seeing any fish come for this blade bait, which is and this is really catching me off guard. I'm like, what's going on here? I'm throwing right through these prime rocks that I see on my active target. I know those rocks are out there. The fish have been sitting on those things every time I come out here. So what's going on? And so I check that area. I check other parts of the structure. Finally, late, it's completely go to a different place, and the same thing, very minimal activity going on. But not only am I seeing the minimal activity, what I also see is a great reduction in water clarity. The water clarity is like half of what it was the day before. And we have a huge wind. It's like one of the windiest days all fall, and if not the whole season, but it's probably the windiest day it had been all fall. And then the light bulb actually went off in my head after I'd been fishing maybe 10 or 15 minutes, not at the end, but 10 or 15 minutes into it, I'm like, dang, this lake is turned over. So yes, it was the fall turnover. So if you're new to fishing, maybe you've never heard of the fall turnover. And what that is, you get water layers, like you actually get different layers of water in a lake. And I'm talking about natural lakes. And these layers, they separate out by water temperature, and that's what keeps them layered. Because water has different densities at different temperatures, believe it or not. 39 degrees Fahrenheit is the most dense level of water. So what happens is this water layers out in summertime. So you get this really warm water from the summer heat, then it stays cooler at the bottom. The cooler water is heavier, it stays there. The warmer water is warmer, it stays up here. This time of year, however, it gets really cold at night, and it's been getting right around freezing. We've had multiple frosts and so on. So this upper layer eventually became colder than this bottom layer. So now, remember what I said about density? This colder water up here is now heavier than this bottom layer. And when you get a big wind like we had yesterday, that top layer, that separation between the layers falls apart. And you get the wind just mixing all the water, mixing the entire water column, top to bottom, and mixes it all into one, what's the word I'm looking for? One, not unanimous, one. Anyways, just one uniform mix of water. So, and that's why that's why when I went out there and the water clarity was the way it was, that's one of the things that you'll notice with fall turnover is you get all this mixing, and you get this just extra turbidity suspended into the water column. So, and there's other indicators of fall turnover. The other thing you could do is, for example, I have this AquaView camera that not only is it a camera, but when you drop the camera down, there's a temperature probe on it. So I could bring that out there and drop it from top to bottom and just see the depths or see the temperature as I drop the probe or camera lens deeper and deeper. And it should read pretty uniform from top to bottom at this point. So that's another indicator. I mean, that's like the way you can actually measure it. Other indicators, you can get, well, I already mentioned the fish scatter. Places where fish had been grouped up in heavy numbers were suddenly scattered. I did catch 3 fish yesterday, 2 on a football head, 1 on the blade bait. But the numbers of fish that I was picking up on after target had greatly diminished. And those fish had scattered out. So that's another indicator. Another indicator is, and this I did not notice, and perhaps it's not the case with every lake, but you can actually get kind of like a funky smell to the lake. I did not see that or smell that, so that's the indicator wasn't there for me. Another one is, and I read this in some literature. You can actually, there's actually like see bubbles rising, and I'm not so sure that's accurate, but maybe it is. But if it's windy, like it has been, and it still is 24 hours later, as I do this video, you're not going to see these bubbles. You might see them on the active target or on your depth finder, but I didn't really see them there either. So take whatever that's worth as being a real indicator or not. Another indicator possibly could be, and this would be an extreme situation. Certain lakes might be susceptible to a fish kill because you stir up all this dead organic material, for example, and that gets up into the water column, and suddenly that somehow, I don't completely understand it, but it creates a higher demand on oxygen of the saturated oxygen in the water, creates a higher demand for that, and it can get to a certain low level to where suddenly now the fish don't have high enough oxygen concentration in the water for them to survive. So that's not happening on this lake, and that does not happen. In most lakes that doesn't happen, but that's just another thing I read in the literature, that it's possible that can happen. So anyways, so that's what happened. And it's the wind. The wind is the key that drives that, okay? To get that mixing going, that wind is the key. Now, how long does this occur? Well, it can happen quickly, like a matter of a few hours, or it can prolong over a few days. It all depends on the wind, really, and just the strength of those layers, and just the way that the temperatures have, just the way the fall has gone. And there's no magic like, hey, as soon as it hits 55 degrees, this lake's going to turn. No, that's not. You can't go by a magic temperature number. It's you need the layers there, and I think what can factor in is the severity of how rapidly it does cool off on that top layer, because really we had a real mild fall, and then suddenly we got blasted with multiple days of near freezing or below freezing temperatures, so that top layer cooled off fast, and then we got this huge blast of wind. So it literally happened in a 24-hour period out here. I mean, it happened that quick. All right, so other things to note would be, not every lake does the fall turnover, okay? Shallow lakes that are windswept, like for example here in Minnesota, Lake Mille Lacs, it's a 100,000 plus acre lake. Maximum depth is maybe 40 feet in one area. There's maybe a lot of 25, 30 foot part of the basin is that deep. That's not deep enough for a lake that size. That lake, it doesn't take much to churn that lake up. 15-mile-an-hour wind's going to churn it up all season long, and that water never gets the opportunity to layer out as far as temperature, because that wind is just frequent enough that it keeps mixing it. So a shallow lake is not going to have a fall turnover. As far as reservoirs go, I'm not as familiar with the mechanisms of that. However, they do stratify out according to temperatures, but not all of them do. Like if you have a reservoir, I imagine a TVA reservoir with all that current constantly flushing through it. Your TVA reservoirs would be, Kentucky Lake, Lake Guntersville, Lake Chickamauga, Pickwick, all that chain of lakes there. They run enough water through there that I imagine it probably doesn't stratify out, but I don't know for sure. Okay, but other reservoirs that really don't have a whole lot of water flow through the summer, they may stratify out. And then how they break down those layers in the fall, perhaps it's the same way. I also did read in the literature that a heavy cold rains could also do that, where you're bringing in, and I don't quite understand that part of it, but reservoirs fluctuate so much up and down. So you get a lot when it does rain, you get way more runoff in reservoirs. So that mixing I should just shut up about reservoirs because I'm getting really speculative about it. But in the literature, it does say that they do, that some of them will turn over, and they do, and I know they do stratify according to layers. Some, the ones that have more stagnant water and don't have the constant flushing like a Tennessee River type reservoir. So anyhow, okay, what does that mean as far as, okay, we got this fall turnover. As a fisherman, how do I deal with that? Okay, so the thing, anytime you have a rapid adjustment in the water conditions, whether it be a rapid temperature change, a rapid change in water clarity, those things tend to put the fish in kind of a funky mood, and it really does. So it's going to take a couple days for these fish to kind of reaccustom to the adjusted environment, but they will reaccustom, and it might be 2 or 3 days, and by then they should be ready to eagerly feed again. The thing that I'm not sure of is, like this one hump I've been fishing where there have been a lot of fish, are the same numbers of fish going to return to that hump? I don't know that. One thing I can say is last year when I was out running a camera out here, which would have been like well into November, shortly before ice up, and I'm certainly the fall turnover had occurred by then, I was finding smallmouth just cruising over just regular muck areas. In deep water, like 35 plus feet. And I found some smallmouths on the rocks, but then I'd go off the rock hump and then go way off the structure, and all of a sudden I'd see a smallmouth just cruising out there in much deeper water. The rock hump, for example, tops out at about 20, and I'm seeing a smallmouth cruising over just the softest silt you could imagine in like 35 feet. So it'll be interesting. And let me just say this, my experience fishing from late October to ice up in Minnesota here, ice up is generally by Thanksgiving on a lot of the lakes. My experience is not that strong. I've done some of it, and it's been very hit and miss. The water temperatures get really cold, and the fish maybe are not as active, and it's really hit and miss. But it'll be interesting now that, I have the exact pinpointed date as to when this lake has turned over, and it'll be interesting to see how the lake rebounds. And I will pass that on to see what I'll pass on my observations, let you know what becomes of this post turnover fishing. What happens to some of the fish? If the lake is completely uniform in its water chemistry, water temperatures are uniform top to bottom, side to side, and just whatever sort of turbidity is uniform. It'll be the bait could literally choose it wherever it wants to go, right? And wherever that bait goes, a lot of them game fish are going to be right on their tails, right? So anyhow, let's see if there's anything else on my notes here that I left. Make sure we covered what I know. We talked about that. Yeah, all right. we got her. We nailed it. So obviously there's probably, if you really want to find out more about fall turnover, you can do what I did. Google it, and there'll be some literature that pops up. Read it, and you'll learn what I did. But it was, but I already kind of knew some of this, but the point is, you could probably get some other variations of what I was saying and see what they say. And then obviously the topic of fishing during fall turnover or after it, that's out there, that's widespread. But I really haven't done a whole lot of that after fall turnover, especially smallmouth fishing. It's just, I'm kind of green in that area, no doubt. But anyhow, enough of that. This video is over.